welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a really in-depth look at Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, known to the world, of course, as Mahatma.
Right, the great soul.
He's this global icon of nonviolent resistance, and his story can feel almost mythical. But our mission here is to dig into the sources, the research, the biographies that show a much more complex figure.
And that complexity is exactly why we need to do this. We're going beyond the activist to find the evolving philosopher who created Satyagraha.
Yeah, the political strategist.
The ruthless political strategist, yes, and also the deeply contradictory man. You just can't separate his world-changing movement from the intense and sometimes shocking personal discipline he demanded.
We'll trace that journey from a painfully shy lawyer to the man who helped bring down the British Empire in India. We have to understand how his ideas on truth and nonviolence inspired people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela.
But we also have to grapple with the critiques, the flaws, and the very real ethical questions his methods raised.
It's a massive story.
Half a century. We're starting where his political life really began. Not in India, but in South Africa, back when he still saw himself as a Briton first.
It's funny, we have this image of Gandhi as the age activist, but we have to start with him as a young man who was, frankly, kind of failing.
Completely. He trains as a barrister in London. He gets involved in the Vegetarian Society there. But when he goes back to India to start a practice, it just doesn't work.
And the sources point to something really specific, right?
Yeah, a really telling vulnerability. They say he was, and this is a quote, psychologically unable to cross-examine witnesses.
So he was just too shy to be a lawyer.
He didn't have the confidence, not in that setting, so he takes what feels like an escape hatch. A one-year contract in South Africa in 1893.
For not a lot of money either.
105 pounds. It was meant to be a temporary thing, but it ended up being the crucible that forged his entire political identity.
And that awakening wasn't gradual, it was immediate. And just brutal.
Oh, yeah. The shock of racial discrimination hits him the second he gets there. First, a magistrate in Durban orders him to take off his turban. He refuses and walks out of the courtroom.
And then comes the famous incident, the one everyone knows.
The train at Pietermaritzburg. He's in a first-class carriage, has a first-class ticket, and he's told to leave. He refuses, and they throw him off the train.
Can you just imagine sitting in that dark, cold waiting room all night? The humiliation. And the sources show the racism was everywhere.
It was systemic. The press and white officials called Indians things like parasite, squalid coolie, yellow man, just deeply dehumanizing.
And that's the turning point.
That's it. It forces him to question everything. He thought of himself as a Briton first and an Indian second, but the empire was telling him that identity meant nothing, so he scraps his plan to go home.
He doesn't just get angry, he gets organized.
Exactly. He founds the Natal Indian Congress in 1894 to fight back, specifically against a bill to deny Indians the right to vote. He starts building a political force.
Which all leads to 1906 and the birth of his method.
Right. The government passes the Transvaal Act. It forces the entire Asian population, men, women, children, to be fingerprinted and carry registration cards.
Treating them like criminals.
Precisely. And in response to that, Gandhi develops Satyagraha.
The concept that defines his entire life. So what did it actually mean on the ground in that first struggle?
It literally means devotion to the truth. In practice, it was organized, nonviolent protest. It meant refusing to obey an unjust law, being willing to go to jail for it, and holding onto your dignity and the truth. And it worked. That struggle lasted 8 years, but it ended with the Gandhi-Smuts Agreement in 1914, a major first victory.
And the sources are so clear that Satyagraha wasn't just a political tactic for him. It was rooted in something much, much deeper.
Oh, absolutely. You couldn't practice it in public if you hadn't mastered yourself in private. That was his core belief.
It all came down to those 5 vows he took, right?
Exactly. Drawn from Jainism and Hindu yoga. There was Satya, which is truth, Ahimsa, nonviolence, Brahmacharya, celibacy, Asteya, non-stealing, and Aparigraha, non-attachment. For him, the political fight was just an extension of your own ethical life.
So let's zoom in on those two main ideas, truth and nonviolence. He had this great analogy for them.
He said they were two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Truth, or Satya, is the ultimate goal, the end.
And nonviolence, ahimsa, is the only way to get there.
The only true way. And he saw ahimsa as something active, not passive. He called it the largest love or greatest charity.
I think that's the biggest misunderstanding for us today. We hear nonviolence and we just think passivity, weakness even.
And it is absolutely not passive resistance. He was very clear about that. He called it a war without violence. It's active, it's moral, it's disciplined.
And he had a very pragmatic side to this, didn't he?
He did. There's this incredible quote where he says that while nonviolence is infinitely superior to violence, he would rather have India resort to arms in order to defend her honor than that she should in a cowardly manner become a helpless witness to her own dishonor.
So cowardice is the real enemy, not violence necessarily.
Cowardice is the moral failure, and that changes everything. The goal of this war without violence isn't to crush your opponent.
It's to convert them.
It's to convert them. It's based on the belief that your adversary is a human being who can be reached with reason and goodness. You expose the injustice of their system by winningly taking the suffering onto yourself. It's a political strategy designed to win the moral argument on the world stage.
So he tests this entire philosophy in South Africa, and then in 1915 he returns to India. And he scales it up massively.
Hits the ground running. By 1921, he's leading the Indian National Congress. And his campaigns aren't just for self-rule, for Swaraj, they're also for social change, like fighting poverty and the caste system's practice of untouchability.
He had early successes, but also some huge setbacks.
Devastating ones. After the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in 1919, where British troops killed hundreds of unarmed people, violence just erupted everywhere.
And what did Gandhi do?
He went on a hunger strike. But not against the British, against his own people to pressure Indians to stop the rioting. He held his own side to the exact same standard.
But the moment that really put the independence movement on the global map, that was the Salt Satyagraha in 1930. Just a masterstroke of political communication.
It was brilliant, strategically brilliant. Before he even started, he sent a letter to the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, calling British rule a curse. And he chose to target the salt tax.
Of all the things he could have picked, why salt?
Because everyone needs salt. The poorest farmer, the richest city dweller, it wasn't some abstract tax on luxury goods.
It was a tax on being alive.
It was a tax on existence itself. It made the abstract idea of colonial oppression brutally concrete for every single person in India.
And the action itself was so visual, so powerful.
Unforgettable. He leads 78 volunteers on a 388-kilometer march to the sea at Dandi. It took them 24 days. And the world's media followed every single step.
And the goal was just to make their own salt.
To defy the law by boiling seawater and making illegal salt. It was an act of mass civil disobedience, and it just exploded. Thousands of people, including so many women, joined in all across the country.
That momentum just kept building, right?
Relentlessly. It all culminated in 1942 with the Quit India movement, his final, most intense demand for the British to just leave. And for that, he was arrested again, along with tens of thousands of others.
And he did live to see independence in 1947. But the sources suggest it wasn't a moment of pure triumph for him.
Not at all. It was a moment of profound personal defeat in many ways, because independence came with the religious partition of the subcontinent.
Which he fought against until the very end.
He fought it, tooth and nail. He wanted one unified country. But it went ahead, and this horrific wave of religious violence was unleashed. Millions of people displaced, hundreds of thousands killed. The man who dedicated his life to nonviolence had to watch one of the bloodiest chapters in modern history unfold.
Okay, so when we look at a figure like this, who wields so much moral authority, we have to talk about the contradictions, the human complexities.
You absolutely have to. I mean, the sources show that some critics at the time saw him as too ideological, maybe even divorced from ground reality in his later years. And we definitely have to address his early, very difficult views on race.
Right, let's talk about that, his time in South Africa.
The complexity is that his views evolved, but his early work was very specifically focused on the rights of Indians, and it often excluded Black Africans. Some sources are explicit. They document his early writings using, well, racist language to distinguish the Indian community from the Black African population.
Views he later abandoned.
He did seem to moderate and abandon them as his philosophy became more universal. But it's a critical and uncomfortable part of his story.
And this is where his personal discipline creates this huge public controversy. I'm talking about his adherence to brahmacharya, to celibacy.
This led to his highly controversial personal experiments, especially after his wife died in 1944.
He was trying to test his own purity, his willpower.
To the absolute extreme. The sources describe him sleeping naked in the same bed with young women from his community, including his own grandnieces, Manu and Abba.
And I mean, How did he justify this? There was a huge outcry at the time.
There was. His argument was that unless he could conquer every last physical temptation, he couldn't claim the moral authority to lead the country through the fire of partition and violence. He needed to prove to himself that he was completely detached, completely pure.
But the people around him, they weren't convinced.
Not at all. His family, his political allies, they criticized him. Some of his staff resigned in protest. They were worried about the psychological impact on the young women. It shows that intense, almost frightening link he drew between his inner self and the fate of the nation.
And in the end, the man who preached nonviolence his entire life
Succumbed to violence himself, tragically. On January 30th, 1948, he was shot and killed by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist. His last words were reportedly, "Ha Rama."
So when we synthesize all of this, what are we left with? We see this towering figure who mastered what we now call transformational leadership.
Absolutely. He had a vision, he inspired millions, he promoted self-reliance with ideas like Swadeshi, home industry. He is, without question, the father of the nation, the Mahatma.
But that final insight from the sources seems to be the most critical one.
For me, it is. It's that tension we talked about. The rigorous, sometimes extreme application of his private ethics directly onto public political force. He genuinely believed that his ability to conquer his own desires was directly connected to his power to defeat an empire.
That belief that the internal state dictates the external outcome, that's what defined him.
It's what defined his power and his contradictions.
That blend of philosophical rigor and political strategy is still so relevant. And that brings us to our final thought for you. Gandhi believed that if nonviolence, ahimsa, had not slowly evolved with civilization, our species would have gone extinct. So when you look at the challenges we face today, the conflict, the political polarization, the information overload, which part of Gandhi's core philosophy do you think is the most critical tool for survival in the 21st century? The relentless insistence on satya, on truth, or the difficult practice of ahimsa, nonviolence?
Something to ponder as you navigate your own world.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.